Hello and welcome back to Everard Junction. Today we're going to be focusing on a layout update. I've been doing an awful lot of work on so many different projects all around the layout. It's not been very easy to film all of it in one nice video with continuity and all that. So what I'll do instead is I'll take you through the various projects that I'm currently working on, and it's worth bearing in mind that everything I'm about to show you is still a work in progress and none of it is finished. So we'll start things off over on the scene that I worked on in the previous video. Not much has happened to this area since that was filmed. I'm still in the process of finalising a few of the extra details and ideas that I want to do, and I also got distracted and caught up with the other projects that I'm about to show you. On the whole, very pleased with this area, but it's still not finished, still plenty of work to do. So we'll move over to the end of the layout, and I'll basically start from here and work my way around so you get a better idea of the scope of work and how the layout sort of fits in the room. So as you can see, something that I've completed since the previous video is to ballast the track in this section. This was the last major bit of ballasting that needed to be done, and that's now completed, and I've also weathered the track and the ballast. I've done my usual trick of using various colours and shades just to create that varied effect, and I've also added some points in the background which you can't see because there's too many trains. So there's the point work in the background. This just allows me to move the trains on the two main lines from one main line to the other, and it also provides just that little bit of scenic interest. It just makes this section of track look a little bit more interesting. So there's a better view of it, and you can see the point work in there. Those are the Pico bullhead points. They just look a little bit nicer than the regular Code 100 or Code 75 ones that they offer, so I've used those. They were left over from the yard that I tore up that was to the side of this area, and you can see I've started to work on some of the track detail and a few things like that. And of course the varied shades and the weathering just complements everything. It all looks a little bit varied. You can see the cable troughing in the background just there, which I will obviously continue and work down this side of the layout. So next we'll move over to the branch line and talk about some of the plans that I have for that. So here we have the branch line, and this was a bit of a talking point in the previous video, and I've got a few questions and suggestions with regards to the idea of constructing a double track bridge, as you can see in front of you there, when it's clearly only a single line. Adding a bit of disused track work was a popular suggestion in various videos going back over the last 2 years or so I thought it was a good idea to try and incorporate some of that, and it just, a bit of scenic interest, something a bit different. Now I have to compromise. This is a model railway, so it's full of compromises. I did not have the luxury of constructing this embankment to support double track. Now you could say, well, you did, you put all of the plaster in the last video. Yes, but once this branch moves further towards the station, it's very clearly only a single track, so doubling this section wasn't really going to yield very much, and it goes against my rule of cluttering everything up with track. So what I did when I built the terrain here was I constructed a bit of terrain in this section to give the illusion that there might have been a point here and it went to double track under the bridge. So we have an option there, if we want to allude to a point, and that they then went to double track under the bridge. The other point of argument is that you could argue that this bridge was built to support a double track branch line, but when the branch line was actually built, the railway company did not have the finances to do so, and thus the double track never happened. So we have three options. Put some sleepers and a few bits and random pieces here to allude to the point and the double track actually occurring. Option 2, build the bridge as is, do nothing to the line or make this all overgrown, and that will explain that the bridge was constructed with the idea of double track that never happened. And then the third option is just get rid of it completely, bring the terrain out to here, build a smaller bridge. It's entirely possible. All of this can easily be fiddled with and changed. Just because it's got grass and a couple of trees on it, don't think it's set in stone. So those are the three options. I'll go either way, to be honest. I don't really mind. I wanted to do the disused track as a lot of people seemed keen on the idea, but then a lot of people criticised the idea in the previous video. So we have some options here. Either works, either is convincing. I really don't mind. So I'll be interested for your input on that one. So now we move to the sweeping curves, and you can see the branch line is now starting to gain some height and join onto the main lines, and you can see the difficulties there with trying to portray the branch line as being double track. It's just not practical. Clearly it was always a single line in this area, so I felt the need not to double and make this large embankment over on that side. I felt it was more important to add a bit of scenery for a change. So now we're starting to move into the area where I've completed most of the work over the last couple of weeks or so, and main objective was to tie the scenes together. I wanted to create one big flowing scene. So the first thing I set about doing was reworking the previous embankment in this area, and I did that for a couple of reasons. Number one, it didn't match at all to the grass that I did here in the previous video. I was quite pleased with this grass in the previous video. I would certainly say, you know, it's not professional, it's not top-notch, but it's a progression of skill. It's certainly better than the last load of static grass I did, and I'm sure when I do it again, I'll take a few lessons from this time as well. So what I had to do was I had to tie the embankment here that I did a while ago to this one. I always knew this problem was going to happen. It's just something that occurs as you develop skills. So what I did was I ripped out the embankment in its entirety, redid the plastering, redid the sculptor mould, and redid all of the ground cover and the static grass to better tie it in to the grass than I did on the sort of tree side of the layout. So now you can see there's a flow to this stuff, and with the exception of those steps, it all sort of blends together, which is what I was hoping for. I will of course be putting a fascia on the layout to cover up this horrible mess. Obviously that looks terrible. You need to cover it up with something, make it look crisp and professional. I'll absolutely be doing that. Whilst I'm still working on major parts of the layout, I don't see the importance in doing it right away. This fence runs all the way to the canal, and it starts quite a bit further down actually. It starts all the way over there. I've not finished it yet. You can see where it fizzles out, but it will follow the edge of the drainage ditch and run all the way to the edge of the layout just there. And of course I'll put a fascia on there to cover up all of that mess. It's a very nice fence. It is extremely fiddly to put together. It's made by Scale Model Scenery, and myself and a few friends tend to refer to it as the Scale Model Scenery Torture Yourself kit, because it is extremely fiddly to put together. But if you've got the patience and the steady hand, wow, it's a lovely little kit, a lovely fence. But yeah, magnifying glass required for that one. The steps here are made of laser cut MDF, and that is also a Scale Model Scenery kit. That's the Harbour Steps kit, very easy to put together. And then we have a few more Scale Model Scenery kits as well. Do quite enjoy using their various products. Cable trunking, as I've mentioned several times, is by them also. It just adds a nice bit of detail to this area. The relay box is made by Will's Kits, and the signal is from Burco. So you can see the fence continues all the way along this area to the canal, and you can see the various industry that's going on in there. So let's move on to that and look at some of that in closer detail. So this whole area is inspired by a small industrial estate that's relatively local to me, and it's a very grotty place. There's lots of nasty little industrial units and pokey little areas full of litter and you know, scrapped cars and all that kind of thing. In real life, it's not exactly a pleasant place, but in model, it has some sort of appeal. So I decided to rip out the previous car auction and instead install this small industrial estate with the idea of creating something that looked a lot more interesting than the car auction. The car auction was never going to last. It's quite a dull scene, it's just concrete and a fence, but it did provide me with some necessary experience to progress my skills and take scenery a little bit further on the layout, and it wasn't more than a few months after I'd constructed it that I knew I would come back and revisit. That's all part of this hobby. It's about reapproaching stuff and learning new skills and trying things out. So our first little building here is this lovely prefab industrial unit. This is a laser cut MDF kit, and it's made by Scale Model Scenery, and I picked it up a couple of weeks ago with the idea of it being the first small unit on the estate. And the plan for this is to have a yard for it to the right here. That's what this area is for. And it will be either a builder's merchant or somewhere where you can hire a skip, or somewhere where you can buy a fence, that type of thing. Construction related industry. What it will exactly be, I'm not entirely sure. I've got a few different ideas. It could be somewhere that sells bricks and slabs and things like that. Let me know in the comments what you reckon. Part of me would quite like a timber industry, somewhere where you come and purchase sections of lumber for construction, but there's also scope for saying it's a skip hire place, or all kinds. So let me know. It's only a small place. We don't have a lot of room to play with, so it needs to be something that's quite compact and will fit nicely in the area. There you can see my hand for scale. So it's not huge. We're talking an area that's probably, if we do it in metric, it's 300 mil by about 200 mil, 250 mil. It's not a large space, so I need somewhere that I can pack a lot of detail in, but I can't just fill it with, say buses and say it's a bus depot, because there's just no room. The ground here was an experiment. The ground on this whole section was an experiment, and I didn't film it because I wasn't sure if it was going to work. Basically what it is, it's a mixture of sculpt mould, and then over the top of that I have applied some exterior poly filler, and I've deliberately made the worst surface possible. I have sanded it and smoothed it out a little bit, but it's very deliberately a poor surface, very similar to the concrete condition in a lot of these small industrial estates. This certainly portrays the pictures of the real place that I'm using for inspiration. So if we move from that small industrial unit over to this section, and this is the first of the 3 industries that is coming up in the next few clips. This is a garage with an attached car dealership that specialises in selling second-hand cars.
Are you looking for a great deal on a quality used second-hand car?
I restore classic cars for a living, so I've always had a big passion on vehicles and cars, and this layout always was going to have some sort of a garage or something in place. I hoped to incorporate it in a different area, but this seemed like the best place for it, and the car auction was in the way. So the car auction was taken up, and instead I think we've got something quite a bit more interesting in the making in this section now. So if you're looking for a new car, there's a selection there for you. I wouldn't recommend this Capri 3 Litre S, although it looks alright. You'll notice that the rear arches have been significantly wobbed up with filler and fiberglass, and the paint match isn't great. Someone's painted the sills black, so I'd avoid that one if I were you. One of these Volvos is probably a bit more of a safe bet. Something I've always found a challenge is the weathering of buildings and the painting of buildings, trying to make them look accurate, trying to make them look realistic. It's always a bit of a challenge for me. This is my attempt at this particular garage. You can see there's a bit of weathering working its way down the corrugated iron and the brickwork, and I've taken the trouble of adding drain pipes and things like that. Pushed myself quite hard on that, and I'm quite happy with it. It's not bad. I certainly wouldn't say it's professional super duper building, but once again it's a progression of skill, which is what I'm trying to learn. So the eventual plan for this is to add a full interior, and I will also sink the building correctly into its foundations. Currently it's just placed on top of the paved surface, and you can obviously see there's a very toy-like gap underneath certain bits, so I will cut that out with a knife and we'll sink the building about a brick down so it actually looks planted in its foundations. As I say, this area is still very much a work in progress. Lots of detail and paintwork to add to that area. Currently it's just a building and some cars. Obviously that's not correct. There needs to be all sorts of detail, and I'll certainly be using my experience in the garage industry to try and incorporate as much of the details that you would typically see in a garage environment. Have a lot of fun with this scene. So as we move from that particular industry, we arrive at the next one. You can see the space is becoming a little bit more generous now, and I can fit some slightly larger scenes and buildings in place. I've deliberately made sure that this whole thing runs at an angle that is not parallel to the baseboard edge, so you get that sort of organic feel. It doesn't look like we're trying to follow any patterns or edges. So this area contains my third scratch-built building. So in between constructing this building, I built the office block, which some of you saw in a video around Christmas time, around the corner. And since then, I've constructed this building. And I'm quite pleased with that one. You can certainly see it's of a better standard than this one. So this place is a commercial specialist, and the building is actually based on a real building in the industrial estate that is providing me with the inspiration for this area. This commercial specialist tends to work specifically on Fords, but also has other bits and pieces available as well, and it also has a few vans for sale, and I'd certainly like to add a couple more details to indicate that perhaps the transit vans back here are for sale. So lots of details to add. I would again like to give the building a full interior, but you get the idea. It's another garage scene, but it's a different garage scene, so I felt it was justified to put it in here. As I've said already, I have a big interest in vehicles and cars. These two industries may not be your cup of tea, but certainly in a lot of estates you will have a tyre centre next to an exhaust centre, next to a bloke that does welding, next to a bloke that does vans, next to a bloke that sells cars, next to a scrap place. So it's quite feasible to have lots of vehicle-based industries next to each other. So this building is loosely based on the real garage that's providing inspiration for this area, and you can see again I've tried hard to portray the mortar wash and show some of the weathering and things like that. I've also gone for an asbestos finish on the roof. I don't know how well the camera will pick it up. I tried quite hard to get that sort of looking right. We've got drainage, gutters, concrete lintel, all the various details that you would expect on a building, and a large roller shutter door, and of course we've got that one open so that vehicles can go in and out. So it's just a nice little project. It was all a learning experience, so I didn't film it. I wasn't sure how well it was going to go. I'm certainly a little bit more confident now with scratch building. And I should mention as well that the roller shutter door is made by Scale Model Scenery. It's one of their kits. This prefab fence is the Goodwood Scenics kit continued, and everything else on the building, with the exception of the roof, is homemade. The roof panel is from Goodwood Scenics. It's actually pressed aluminium into a corrugated fashion, so it's not plastic, it's actually aluminium sheet, and it's very, very nicely done, very close to scale. So I'll certainly be getting some more of that. And once again, I should say none of this is affiliated. I saw these online, thought they looked good, bought them with my own money, and then set about trying to make them look good on a homemade building. On this side of the building you can see the windows. These are once again homemade, and I've built up a little bit of confidence now with the scratch building thing. So the next building I attempt, I will bother to film it and show you some of the processes that I use to try and achieve a convincing looking structure. So plenty of vehicles in the compound, most of them made by Oxford Diecast, and I've got some of these Sherpa vans. I've got a British Rail version of these, but they also do the van version rather than the minibus version. So I purchased two of those, stripped all the paint off and painted them white, as they were red and done up in a livery from the box. I just wanted some traditional white vans, and you can see I've done a bit of weathering and a bit of rust here and there to show that these vehicles were about 10 or so years old by the time the layout is set. Round the back I've added a couple of older vehicles. I fancied doing a sort of a side bit to the area. I could have made this building the full width of the compound, but I fancied this little side area where they've just dumped stuff that's just beyond repair or too old in this case. So we've got some Mark 1 transits in there, and once again you can see I've done the appropriate levels of weathering and rusting to these vehicles, as these would have been 12 to 15 years old by the time the layout is set. Lots of details and extras to add. At the moment we've just got vehicles, a fence and a building, but the basics are in, and I'm quite pleased with how that little area has come along. Just while this 47 is passing, I'll just quickly mention I've been starting to install some flashing tail lamps on some of my stock, and those are made by DCC Concepts, and you can see that one's fitted on the end of that train there and happily flashing away. So the effect I'm going for is this area here is the road that runs past these various units, hence the gate and the various fences, and you can see how it's set at a different angle to the baseboard edge just to keep things a bit random and interesting. And there you can see some of the weathering effects on that building a little more clearly. I still find that a bit of a challenge, but I am getting better with each attempt. So now we move into the last bit of industry by the canal, and this is certainly the most challenging and the most interesting bit. I've always wanted to do a decent attempt at a scrapyard, something I've always wanted to do. I felt I could incorporate it somewhere else on the layout, but the car auction area certainly seemed to be the best place for it. So this is a representation of a typical small scrapyard that you would have found in various towns and cities, certainly on the outskirts during this period. Indeed, there was a scrapyard on the entrance to Oxford Station back in the day, so a lot of people who were travelling to Oxford for the first time would often get the view of this scrapyard and a stack of knackered old cars before they entered the historic city of Oxford. But the basic idea is we have over here the yard office, and that's actually quite a plush building for a location like this. It would quite often have been a caravan or something similar, but this place does have a brick structure. This is a Hornby Scaledale item. It's quite old now. I'm not sure if you can still get it. I've repainted it to better tie it in to its surroundings, and I've also notched the roof and made sure it incorporates nicely into the building for the commercial garage. So all I've got in the yard at the moment is just the vehicles, but there will be a lot more scrap being added over the coming months. It will take a long time for me to get it all sorted out, but you can see some of the vehicles there. Almost all of these are made by Oxford Diecast and have been in my collection for various years, and a lot of them have been repainted, a lot of them have been detailed and rusted, and you can see some of the effects going on there, as well as a few examples that have been in accidents and written off as a result. So here we have a Bedford HA at the end of its life, and you can see I've done it up to sort of look like a vehicle that's been sitting in the yard for 4 or 5 years or so. So there's plenty of dirt and corrosion that's been washed down the side of the body from rainwater, hence the vertical streaking, and you can also see some of the patch bodge repairs in an attempt from the previous owner to get through that last MOT. Looking at the transit underneath it, you can see a similar condition. You can see how the wheel arch has been repaired previously in an effort to try and keep the van going, and somebody's also managed to get their hands on a decent driver's side door. A lot of vehicles ended their days in scrapyards like this due to structural corrosion. That's how vehicles tended to reach the end of their useful life, whereas these days it tends to be more mechanical failure that will take a car off the road. But certainly back in the 60s onwards, it was usually structural corrosion that brought the car to its end. So here we have some more of the experimental work that I've been trying out. I've only tried it on 4 cars so far, and I certainly wouldn't say that I've got particularly good at it, but it's a start. So you can see there we have a Mini that's been involved in a nasty head-on shunt. Somehow the windscreen didn't break. I should probably remove that. But you can see the effects there of a crash-damaged vehicle, and we've also got a couple of other examples, such as this Morris Marina that's met a very nasty end in a similar front-end collision, albeit slightly more focused on the passenger side of the car. So to make these effects, basically what I did was I used a cutting disc in a Dremel tool, and I cut off the front of the Morris Marina about halfway along the wings. I then used some model filler to sort of recreate the front of the vehicle. I just put a blob of filler on the front of it, and then as it dried I carved it into various shapes and then glued various offcuts and shavings and bits of random stuff over the filler to create a damaged look, and then I've painted it with various paints, making sure to include some corrosion, some aluminium, silver coloured parts, a bit of chrome, perhaps a flash of orange from a surviving indicator light lens, and you can also see a bit of the blue bodywork paint still showing there as well. So it just creates that little bit of interest. Not every car in a scrapyard would just be a rusty, life-expired example. It would be a car that's been in a nasty accident as well. So here we have an example of a Mark III Escort. It wouldn't have been particularly old by 1989, but you can see there that this car's been taken off the road as it was rear-ended quite nastily. It's just a little bit of an extra effect to add to the yard, and I haven't done it to every single vehicle, but you can see the variety there. There we have a Mark III Capri with the typical Capri damage, slid off a roundabout into a lamppost whilst trying to impress someone doing a bit of drifting. Many Capris met their end that way. And then we also have this example of a Mark I Capri, which I cut the bonnet off and made some modifications to try and show the engine. You've seen that in previous videos. Well, the story goes that the owner never did get round to getting it fixed, and he brought it to this place, and I think he got about 25 quid for it. So there you have the beginnings of the scrapyard. Something I've always wanted to do, something I'm still trying out different techniques and different skills, but it's certainly a lot more interesting than the car auction. Each vehicle can tell its own story if you take the time to paint each one up in a certain way. So where the scrapyard borders the canal, I've constructed this fence. This is a fence kit from Goodwood Scenics, and it's part of the corrugated sheet metal that they offer, and you can see the effects there. I've cut the corrugated metal up into strips, primed, painted and weathered each one, and then glued them to the frame for the fence, which I'll show you in a second. And I've deliberately made sure to glue them onto the fence in a random order so that we get different levels of painting and rust in various areas. And I've also made sure to not make the fence uniform in appearance, so some of the panels are at a jaunty angle and they don't all meet properly at the top, typical of many corrugated fences of this type. Here's the other side of the fence. You can see the framework just there, and once again that is also a metal item, the whole kit being comprised of mild steel or aluminium. I've also added a bloke trying to save a Mark I Granada from the crusher, as I have a particular soft spot for these cars, having an example of my own in real life. So I thought it'd be nice to portray somebody trying to save a car from the crusher. I've also made a little bit of an effort to start improving the weathering on the walls, so you can see some of the mortar washes have been picked out, and I've also toned down some of the somewhat overdone black weathering soot streaks. It's certainly not perfect, I'm still practicing with this sort of thing, but it's getting better, and I plan to bring that effect to the rest of the retaining wall, having done a few sections of it already. At this point the canal section is still removable. It's not been fully set into the scene, so you'll notice there isn't much in the way of scenery or detail between the edge of the fence and the edge of the canal. That is something I will eventually get round to sorting out. The canal is currently still removable. I will add some subtle water effects to the canal in a couple of places. That's been mentioned in the comments a few times. I need to go careful, not overdo it. It's important to look at what British canals look like typically. They're not rivers, there is no current unless there's a boat passing or the weather is poor, you don't see an awful lot of water movement on the surface. But I agree, just having it like flat glass is a little bit dull, so perhaps a few water effects on the surface of that would certainly improve things. But we're certainly not doing a rushing river or a mountainous stream or anything like that. But something on the surface of that, I think, just make things look a little bit more exciting. So now we move to the final section that I've been working on, and that is to overhaul and improve the gardens for the terraced houses. These are still a work in progress, so please excuse the copper washing lines. They will be tensioned and painted correctly once I get round to it. But you can see I've made a bit more of an effort with the gardens this time round. Something that was mentioned in the comments the first time round was I used the same type of fence for each garden, and while it's only 7 properties and that is entirely possible, I agree a bit of variety wouldn't go amiss. So we've now got several different types of fence installed in this location, and I'm really happy with how things are starting to look. So the story goes, this fence here, which is concrete posts with wire netting, that's what these houses originally had bordering their gardens. These panel fences here, these are made by Gauge Master, they're laser cut, very nice they are too, as you can actually paint them different colours. So you can see we've got 3 different colours going on there, 4 actually if you include this bit down in the foreground. So that type of fence, that's been put up by the residents over crime concerns, security concerns, or just for reasons of privacy. Again, I've tried to create a bit of a story with it. So you can see this house here, got a young lad in the paddling pool there. Dad decided to put up a decent fence around his property because he wanted to protect his family, or whatever reason, was concerned of crime on the canal, whatever you want. This much newer looking fence here that runs all the way to the end, that's been put up by British Waterways over a recent spate of crime and complaints from the residents, and you can see that's been installed along there, and I've deliberately made it look very new, as if it's been a recent addition. I've left the fence that was original to these properties in position. That is quite typical in Britain, and there are many examples even today. If you go out for a walk, find yourself a housing estate that's been up for 20-25 years, if you can find a public footpath that goes around the back of it, you'll notice that there are many places where the fences are double in layers. The previous fence has fallen down, it's gone beyond repair, the resident has installed a new fence. Very rarely does the old fence get taken down, and in this case British Waterways, who have put this fence up to protect the houses from the canal, or the canal from the houses, depending on your point of view, they would not have the time or the inclination to remove and tidy up the fences of the residents. So they've simply put a new fence straight along the boundary of the existing one. So you get these nice, random, different sort of effects. And we can see I've made a little bit more effort with the static grass and the variety in the gardens, trying to create some different scenes. So here we have what you would call perhaps a fairly typical garden. We've got some furniture, a basic patio, and a simple lawn with a few weeds and stuff at the far end. Then we have a garden owned by an elderly resident. Much more pride has been taken in the garden. We've got a few prized plants and stuff growing in there. That's not quite finished yet. Next door, much to their disgust, we have neighbours from hell with all sorts of rubbish and junk thrown around the garden. So you can see we've got a defective fridge, a pile of slabs, some tyres, a traffic cone, various random pieces of timber, an old bike, and even some bricks. And you can see how the grass is considerably more overgrown. Next we have again a fairly typical garden for a young family, and you can see this family has erected a decent fence around their property to protect themselves from any criminals that might be walking the towpath of the canal, and any dodgy goings on from neighbours from hell next door. And I've then continued a similar theme of randomness, trying to make each garden a bit different, changing the effect of the lawn. And you can see the effects there. We've got a garden shed and a few other things. And then in this far garden here we have some out of control buddleia plants that have very much taken over that garden. And you can see how that fence continues around that side, as there is an alleyway leading to the street. The houses themselves that go in this area are currently downstairs being worked on. Plenty to do to those. They certainly won't be finished the next time you see them, but I hope to have improved a few bits and pieces and made them look a little bit more individual. So there you go, an awful lot of work in various small areas, and it's taken a long time to get to this point, but I'm very happy to be adding some of these finer details, learning some new skills and tying up those loose ends. So we now finally have all of the ballast installed on the main part of the layout. And then that blends quite nicely into this section here. I still need to complete those trees and add the various details. Now the scene starts to blend into a little bit more of an industrial area. We get the idea that town is approaching. And then we move into a few more details. We've got that bit of infrastructure over there, which I'm quite pleased with. Once again, it's still being worked on. And then we move into some light industrial units and industry, with a heavy theme on the automotive side of things, as that's my primary interest. We've also then really started to make some good strides in the scrapyard, and I've also started to move into the main area of town and improve various aspects such as the gardens. So there you go, hope you enjoyed the video. As you can see, it's a lot of work, a lot of different projects and bits and pieces all in progress currently, and I'm looking forward to getting some of those bits fully completed. Some of the items I forgot to mention include lifting and reballasting this piece of track here to fix a rather annoying bump that only showed up on camera. That's now fixed and the track is nice and smooth. I've started to lay some of the cable troughing on the branch line. The branch line has been weathered. I have weathered both of my Daypol Class 121 rail cars, and I also repainted the blue on that example. I've started to work on some of the scenery in the background. I'm also working on a low relief warehouse which will go in the background and cover up that nasty overscale bit of the back scene. I'm continuing to work and build various little kits off camera which will be added to various areas around the layout. I've partially repainted and freshened up my old Class 108 DMU. I've also fitted a large number of passenger figures inside, and of course fitted a driver. So I hope you enjoyed it, and as always I'll be back as soon as I can with the next one.